Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. It's Saturday, the 16th of August, and it's 12:31 my time. We've just come out yesterday at 8:30. We came out of the longest blackout I've ever experienced. It was 36 hours. There was a big storm, and it took down one of the posts that had a transformer on it. This is my mountain road, right? And the problem is, in my humble opinion, not to criticize Costa Rica, but they don't do any branch trimming around power lines here. And so you get a big storm and all hell breaks loose. And so a lot of cables came down, and you got to be very careful. Like, you can't open the fridge door, you can't open the freezer door, because you got to maintain the coolness of everything so you don't lose a bunch of food. Um, so that was quite an adventure. And then I had a friend here, a good friend of mine now. I've known him several years, going back to when I was doing a radio show. And he's from Texas, lovely gentleman. I think it's his third or fourth time visiting me. He usually comes for 3 days at a time. He has a very strict philosophy about visiting people. He said visitors and fish spoil after 3 days. So, but it's always a lovely 3 days to spend with him. And we actually left the mountain this time and went to some hot springs a couple hours away. And that was nice too. And so now I'm back to normal, and I was thinking of doing a podcast last night, but I didn't quite feel up to it, so I passed on that. Please forgive me. But here we are today, and today I don't have anything specific in mind. I just want to kind of do a talking podcast and just maybe counterbalance some of the more critical social, cultural, and spiritual observations of the Talamanca Review, which can be a lot to digest and can easily be perceived as quite negative, although I'm not trying to be negative, I'm trying to be truthful. And I'm always mindful of the fact that I have to balance out in some way, that I have to provide the counterbalance to all of this. And of course, the counterbalance is you. You are the counterbalance, your innate inner resources, and accessing and using those inner resources, like your connection to the love of the Creator, in whatever system speaks to you. This is one thing that is quite unique about the Talamanca Review. I don't proselytize in favor of any one religion. I do, however, advocate meditation. I don't think anything is equal to it in the spiritual arts. I think prayer can be useful in certain circumstances, but it does not equal meditation for revelation, for expansion of consciousness, and for accessing the divine within you, which is just a sense of well-being in its most non-phenomenological form, a sense of peace and well-being, something that you might have experienced on a vacation in a national park or something, one of those times in your life where you left all the worries behind and you just existed. That is the divine, because this moment we're living in is always the best moment to be in. Not to dismiss the efficacy of planning and future planning and things like this, or to dismiss the value of the past and its memories and things like this. But quite simply, the present is where you always want to be. So it's in the accessing of these inner resources that we begin to gain an understanding of life. And this is a very hard and a very disciplined path. 9 times out of 10, when I sit down to meditate, I don't want to meditate. There's a resistance in me. But 10 or 15 minutes into it, it always turns. And this represents the battle between the dominant consciousness of waking and the diminutive consciousness of the inner life. And it's in all of us. This is the battle between accessing the true self and staying within the limited self, this silly little ego construct. And it is a constant battle. It is something that really never goes away. It can go away at a certain point in your journey, but for me, it hasn't gone away yet. So the spiritual work is always an act of self-discipline, similar to going to the gym, similar to dieting, similar to anything that requires you to deny yourself. And in the act of meditation, you're denying yourself the stimulation of the world and the stimulation of the senses and the stimulation of the mind. But over time, the results of this become undeniable. Nobody can deny the result and the benefit of meditation. It's undeniable. And you can even approach it agnostically, which we now know was a word created by Aldous Huxley. You can approach meditation agnostically. You don't have to believe anything to begin doing it and to begin experiencing the well-being of this practice. Okay? Now, that said, I just want to talk about life here for a little bit and what's going on. So I haven't heard back from the Arawi Nari, the Federation of the Quebecer Natives, but I'm sure they're carefully considering my proposal. And I've been in the interim doing a little bit of research, and there are national parks in Costa Rica, like the Corcovado Park in the Osa Peninsula, which is a beautiful part of Costa Rica, wherein they're actually encountering problems now with too many tourists going on nature hikes in the jungle. And so, I mean, some of these tour groups are seeing 240 people per day, and they're now starting to realize that it's affecting the ecosystem. Now, because the place I live has always been the territory of the Quebecers, we have no such problem. But it was a fascinating insight for me into how popular these hiking tours are and going into the jungle. And I think even sleeping in the jungle even takes it up a notch, even goes further than that. So I feel very optimistic, which is an incredible thing in 2025, to feel optimistic about a business, because I think that pessimism rules in the West now, because more things are coming apart than things are being built. Now, the predatory class that is responsible for this collapse, they know what they're doing, and they'll profit handsomely for this. They know what to buy. It's all told to them. If you think this is a free market, you're an idiot. No offense, okay? But seriously, if you think this is a free market, you're a moron. This hasn't been a free market since the beginning of the 20th century. Never has been a free market. All the myths of our society are just that. They're myths. And not even productive myths that, once decoded from metaphor to literal, have a deeper meaning. These are myths in the sense that they're negative lies and part of the imaginative structure of Western society, and specifically North American, and specifically American. And so this false belief that you can do anything and build anything is just that. It's a false belief. And it's been demonstrated time and time again through profound medical breakthroughs that have been suppressed and not brought to market. I would consider myself a victim of it, in the fact that I have not reached a wider audience with my books, especially the fiction, like God is an Economist and The Stolen Child. We see it in inventions, like hydrogen water engines and things like this, which quite frankly should have been on the market 50 years ago in 1975. But the entire modality of our society is to create exploitative markets, or what the controllers like most, this is their favorite thing, are what I call toll booth economies. Now, if you live in a state that has toll roads or toll highways, you know what I'm talking about. We also have them in Costa Rica, which in itself is a profoundly corrupt society at a governmental level. I'll speak about that a little later. But a toll booth is something you can't avoid if you have to use a road, and it's never a huge amount of money. It's just something that, okay, I'll pay this, because it's more convenient for me to use this highway. I'll pay it. And it's a fascinating study, toll roads, because you can almost get a glimpse into the whole society through toll roads. And I'll give you one classic example of what I mean. We have a toll highway in Toronto called the 407. And it was built just north of a highway called 401. And both of these highways go east to west at the top of the city. Okay? So the 401 is a much longer highway. The 407 is a regional highway that goes from the far east of the Greater Toronto area, which extends into the connected suburbs that have been integrated into the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area. And the unification of cities and smaller municipalities or suburbs that became their own cities around them, that all started in the 80s and 90s. And we're creating city-states, basically. That's what they are now. And so Toronto is a massive city-state now. It must be one of the biggest in the world. And you've got these giant suburbs that all have about 1 million people themselves, like Mississauga, Brampton, Markham, North York. And then going further east, you get Scarborough. And then you keep going east and you get another municipality called Whitby. And all together, it's got to be somewhere between 6 and 8 million people. So these are massive cities now, and that represents almost 25% of the population of the country in Canada in one urban center, and people's desires to live in cities. Now, the 407 was built by the Ontario government, and Ontario is the most populous province in Canada, and it has the city of Toronto, and it has the nation's capital, which is Ottawa, my birthplace. And so it's an important province. And the congestion on this highway called the 401 became so bad that they had to build another highway. And so they built a highway from the public treasury, and this was the 407. And there are, on all the entry points to the 407, there are cameras that read your plate. And you can buy a meter that goes in your car. It sits on the dash, or you can put it in various places in your car. I think you can clip it to your visor as well. And it will electronically communicate with the gate infrastructure that has the cameras on it and begin to clock your journey on the 407. It's digital toll. And then when you get off, it clocks you leaving the highway as well. And you literally get charged for every kilometer you travel on the 407. It's kind of mind-boggling, really. And this was built by the government. And if it's built by the government, you might say, that's not a bad idea, because over time it's going to garner a lot of money for the provincial treasury. And they'll be able to pay down the debt and eradicate deficits. And it's not a bad thing if you think about it like an economist. But the moment they were done the highway, what they did, in one of the most duplicitous things ever done in Ontario, and many duplicitous things have been done in Ontario. They sold the 407 to a private company for far less money than it cost to build it. And they invested this private company, which inherited the camera technology and the tolling technology, to ticket people. And if those tickets aren't paid, to suspend their licenses, suspend their driver's licenses. This power was given to a private company. Now, if you're a conservative purist, that we see a lot of in the United States now, you might think, well, that's not the end of the world, Bruce. And I might be inclined to agree with that on some days of the week, but largely I do not. And I don't know why the government would sell such an incredible revenue-generating thing to the private sector. And this happened about 30 years ago in Toronto. And what it did was it began to give insight into the future that was coming in the West, which is what are called public-private partnerships. And what this entails is that the responsibilities of government are transferred to the private sector. Okay? And we see this everywhere now. Although the private for-profit prisons have not entered into Canada yet, they are the new norm in the United States. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment. I want you to think about whether or not it's a good idea to have privately run for-profit prisons. Why might that be a bad idea? Well, if your money is coming from incarcerated individuals, you have a massive incentive to keep people incarcerated. When the system was run publicly, and probably at a loss, meaning that the government did not make money on the prison system, there was more lenience and more forgiveness, and people could be let out early on good behavior and things like this, because there was no financial incentive to keep them in there that I'm aware of. If somebody's done a deeper dive on this topic and wants to correct me, just put it in a note. But to the best of my understanding, no, there was no profit motive in the public sector prison system. In private sector, there is. And if you look at those two examples I just gave you, the 407 highway and the private public prison system, you get a snapshot of everything that's going on now. Okay? And this has been driven by bankers. And the IMF does this as well. Okay? So so the International Monetary Fund. So what they would do is they would go into countries and they would loan that country money. And if the debt wasn't paid back through a legal process or through a subtext of the contract, the government would be forced to transfer a public utility to the IMF, and the IMF would sell that public utility to a private sector company far below market value. And that private sector company would come in and control the electricity of, let's say, Brazil. Completely theoretical example. I don't know if that ever happened. Okay? Now, I'm going to go back to Taiwan for a moment, because Taiwan did some things that I thought were absolutely brilliant. Taiwan has a high-speed rail system. Okay? We do not have those in the West yet. Taiwan has beautiful buildings and beautifully designed cities. Taiwan has good roads. And this was back in the 90s. I'm sure it's even better now. Okay? Taiwan had all of these beautiful and wonderful things. And the curious thing about Taiwan is the income tax was 6%, and nobody in the private sector paid it. The only people they were acquiring income tax from were public sector employees like police officers, firemen, government officials, and even that I'd suggest might be dubious if you looked into it. And so I thought to myself, how do they run this society? Where do they get their money from? And what Taiwan did under the government that ruled it from about World War II or 1949 onwards, and they were called the Kuomintang, or for short, the KMT, Kuomintang. And this was the political party formed by Chiang Kai-shek. And Chiang Kai-shek was the nationalist leader and the democratic leader who lost the battle for ground and dominance and supremacy in China to the Chinese Communist Party and was forced to leave. And they did leave in 49, and 1 million soldiers came over from the Nationalist Army. And the population of Taiwan in 1949 could not have been more than 10 million people. It was only 23 million people when I lived there in 91 to 90 to 92. 90, yeah. And was it 91 to 92? No, it was not. I lived there 91 to 92. Like the beginning, I think I went over February 91, and I came back like September or October 92. So just under 2 years I was there. And so what the Kuomintang did was just take over the country and create, in a sense, a dictatorship as vicious and domineering as anything Mao was doing on the mainland. But they called it democratic. And the U.S. State Department had no problem calling this democratic Chinese. So you can't believe everything you read in the news. A lot of it's just a bunch of bullshit, people going on and on about Taiwan. But the Kuomintang had, when I was there, what I considered to be some absolutely brilliant policies that I think every government in the world in a free society should do. I don't think that governments should tax things that are considered vices. Like there's massive taxes on alcohol, massive taxes on tobacco, taxes on casinos, things like this. I think the government should select 3 or 4 industries that it can take over and generate all its revenue from and publicize them, make them public entities. Now, the Kuomintang did precisely this. Okay? They took over the beer industry and they took over the tobacco industry in Taiwan. And they made most of their revenue from selling beer and tobacco. You believe that? I think I've told this story before on the Talamanca Review, or perhaps I know I've told it on my radio show going back years. But so when you were over there, you would get this white generic pack of cigarettes called Taiwan cigarettes, right? And they were very cheap. Now you could get everything else, you know, and they had Taiwan beer, Taiwan Pijiu, okay, and that's what most people drank. They drank the Taiwan beer and they smoked the Taiwan cigarettes because it was the best bargain on the market. And pretty much all the money that the government needed, they got from this. Okay? And like I said, you could still get a pack of Marlboro Reds, but there was a large duty on them. So the government would end up making as much on the imported brand as they did on their domestic brand. Same thing with beer. Like if you went into a bar and ordered a Heineken, you'd pay the equivalent of $6 or $7 US in 1992. Okay? And if you got a Taiwan beer, it's like $1.50. Right? So you see the difference? And so there was a massive, so it was the best of all worlds. If you had the money and you were well-to-do, you could buy the imported products and show off to your friends. And if you were just a regular Joe who smoked, you could buy the Taiwan cigarettes and you'd be fine. And I remember thinking to myself, that's got to be the most brilliant thing I've ever seen a government do. And I started to think about, why is private industry so sacrosanct in the West? Why do we just let it be the way it is? Now, I'm going to say some radical things on the Talamanca Review today, okay? Some things that you might not initially agree with. Or maybe you will. Maybe you'll think, hey, that Bruce is on to something. That's brilliant, okay? If I were running the United States now, I would appropriate Amazon. I would just take it away from Jeff Bezos the way they took Alibaba away from Jack Ma, the founder, in China. And they said, you've become too big. You're a threat to the party. We don't want to represent this kind of wealth and individual achievement in Chinese society. They don't say that. You never read it in the press, but that's the thinking in the CCP. And the CCP just takes over Alibaba. And they leave Jack with a little bit of money, like he'll never want for anything. His children or grandchildren will never want for anything. And Jack ends up giving Alibaba to the Chinese government. Now you may think to yourself, well, that's Bruce, we can't have that. We can't have the government, taking over these industries. Well, the government already has taken over the industries through the excessive taxation, to the point that even the vendors are finding it problematic, their relationship with the government. Ask the people at Jack Daniels. Ask the people at Budweiser Beer. Okay? So why not just come out and do it? Why not just come out and say, we're going to take over beer and cigarettes in the United States, okay? We're just going to do it. There's nothing you can do about it, and that's all there is to it. Well, there's this cultural mythology in the United States that says that can't be done because it's mixing the public and the private sector too much. We can't have government running an industry. Well, I would suggest to you at this point that the relationship between the public and private sector industries is equally egregious, like the example I gave of the 407 highway. In fact, even worse in many ways. Okay? Even worse. Now, this privatization is largely being directed by the monetary forces in the world. So this would be the IMF, the Bank of International Settlements, and so on and so forth. Let's take a deeper look at one of these topics. Before we go on to our specific example, which is the 407, and yes, I used my Gemini AI, it is a fantastic tool for certain things. Other things it completely lies about, okay? I was going to do a podcast the other day on the Holocaust, and I decided not to, because even I have my limits on controversy, right? But I asked Gemini AI about fuel in World War II and how it was a strategic commodity for the war effort because mechanized warfare requires copious amounts of diesel and gasoline. And it turns out it was a huge factor in the war. And Germany was deprived of fuels. And what they did in classic German ingenuity to get around that was they created plants that produced synthetic fuels derived from coal. Absolutely brilliant, okay? And they were able, but still, the major problem for the Nazi forces and the Allied forces, the Nazi Allied forces, so Japan as well, one of their major consternations in World War II was access to fuel. And then I asked Gemini AI, how much fuel did it require to incinerate a body? And why would so much fuel be allocated to the incineration of 6 million bodies of Jewish people, homosexuals, and gypsies? And let's face it, genetic defectives, because the Nazis were pretty hard on a lot of people, right? Like Down syndrome people. This is a merciless regime. Please don't think for a moment I'm putting them up on a pedestal. I'm not. But the answer that Gemini AI gave me on this particular question was a lie. I actually caught AI doing a human version of ah. And it ultimately spat out that the final solution for the Jews was the preeminent priority of the Nazis above even winning the war. It says it. That's what Gemini AI said, okay? And I thought to myself, that's bullshit. Because if they lose the war, they're in a world of shit. And if fuel is a necessary commodity to win the war, why would they divert so much to the crematoriums? Now, you've got to look at the Holocaust through the energetic economics of it to begin to see that there's no way it happened. And I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm not trying to hurt the feelings of anybody, especially Jewish people, okay? No doubt, concentration camps, no doubt, some nasty stuff. No doubt, the experimentations done on twins by Mengele actually happened, okay? But the idea that there was a slaughter of 6 million souls is a lie. It's an absolute lie. And the easiest lens through which to see it is the energy, the fuel. Okay? And the only answer Gemini could come up with was that the desire to destroy the Jewish population in Europe was greater than their desire to win the war. Now, I find that extremely specious. Think about it for a moment. If you lose the war, you're going to be prosecuted for killing all these Jews. Okay? It's like the most egregious war crime ever. Okay? To exterminate 6 million people who were essentially civilians. They weren't POWs. And doing it throughout various countries. You know, Hungary, Poland, all of these places. And thinking that that is your top priority over winning the war. I can't believe that. So I literally caught Gemini AI lying to me. But I don't blame them. I mean, even artificial intelligence has to tiptoe around the biggest lie of the last 80 years, right? Because this is one of the biggest sacred cows in the West, that the Holocaust happened, and it didn't. But anyways, let's get back to my example, okay? And this is a brilliant answer by Gemini AI. So the question I asked was, give me a deeper understanding of the 407 highway in Toronto. Who built it and why the government sold it to a private company and gave the private company the ability to suspend driver's license of Ontarians? And more to the point, does this begin to exemplify a trend in private-public partnerships that are detrimental to a population? So what I've been working with AI quite a bit, and what I have found is that the questions you ask, how you prompt it, and how you form your question is going to determine the quality of your answer. And you get better and better at prompting as you go along. So the answer I got is as follows. The history of Toronto's Highway 407, also known as the 407 Express Toll Route, 407 ETR, is a complex case of public-private partnership, P3 in parentheses. So we refer to, in government memorandums internationally in the West, public-private partnerships are referred to as P3s because there's 3 Ps, right? Public-private partnership, P3. That has been both a source of innovation and significant controversy. The highway was initially built by the Ontario government to relieve congestion on the heavily trafficked Highway 401. However, its subsequent sale to a private company and the terms of that sale have led to public backlash and raised questions about the efficacy and fairness of certain P3s. Construction and sale of the 407. The initial concept for Highway 407 was a public sector project planned in the late 1950s to serve as a bypass for the Highway 401. However, construction didn't begin until 1987, and the central portion of the highway was built and opened by the Ontario government in 1997. So it took them a decade to build it, and their budgets were way, way overblown. There were accusations of corruption, all kinds of things. For those of you who were living in Ontario at the time, you can remember all of this. For those of you who find the details of what I'm talking about remote, stick to the generalities. Try to apply this to something similar in your region, whether it be Alabama or Kentucky or California. California's all over these public-private partnerships now. Okay? And they're the result of the insipid corruption in our politics and the big money funding political campaigns. Simply put, democracy just doesn't work anymore. It hasn't worked probably for 50 years. And yet we continue in the lie, in the degenerative, non-realized myth that it works. And not only that, we go to war over it because people aren't adhering to the principles of democracy. Think about that for a moment. The original plan was for it to be a toll road for a period of time, perhaps 30 years, to recoup the construction costs, after which it would become a free public highway. Brilliant idea. Get the public to pay for it. Okay? I'm all in favor of that. So, a kind of direct taxation, if you will. This plan changed dramatically in 1999 when the government of Ontario, under then Premier Mike Harris, sold a 99-year lease on the highway to a private consortium, 407 International Inc., for $3.1 billion. The government stated reasons for the sale included reducing the provincial debt and raising funds for other public programs. The toll wouldn't have done that? Doesn't make any sense when you think about it, right? Such as healthcare and education. The sale was a major part of the government's strategy to balance the budget. There's that hard-nosed fiscal reality that those far-right conservatives like to rub our noses in all the time, right? When really it's just pork barreling. It's just making them and their friends richer. It's disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. A key element of the deal was that the government did not cap the toll rates, allowing the company to raise them as long as certain traffic levels were maintained. This led to numerous significant toll increases over the years, far surpassing initial projections and making the 407 one of the most expensive highways in the world. Now, I want you to remember something. This highway was built to bleed off some of the traffic on the 401, which was so excessive you could end up in 2 and 3 hour traffic jams. There was a study done a few years ago of the 19 most congested cities in the world, 19 or 20. And I read the article, and all the cities you might imagine were on the list: Tokyo, New York, and Mexico City. Number one for congestion in the whole world was Toronto. Okay? So this is how important the 407 was. Now, for those of you who don't know, Canadians are already one of the most highly taxed people in the world, not living in an outright communist country. Hands down. I think number 2 is Australia. And so the two colonial expressions of the British Empire that are like them, meaning white and coming from a Christian origin, are in fact the most exploited economies in the world and the most exploited peoples in the world. Okay? Well, that might be a bit grandiose when you get down here in South America and you look at what's going on in Central America, but please forgive my hyperbole there. But the highest tax countries in the world per capita are Australians and Canadians. Okay? So it's the most expensive highway in the world. Now, the power to suspend driver's licenses. The private company 407 ETR was granted a unique and powerful collection mechanism as part of the deal. The ability to request that the Ministry of Transportation deny the renewal of a vehicle's license plate if the owner has unpaid tolls. This license plate denial power was established by the Highway 407 Act. So they had to write provincial legislation to enforce this. It went through our legislature. Think about this in the scope of public-private partnerships, because if you don't understand what a P3 is, you have not been paying attention to what's been going on around you if you live in what we euphemistically call the first world, because it's not the first world anymore. You can have better quality of life in any number of places in the world now. These public-private partnerships are just a form of, I think, extortion and bribery and abuse of the public. Okay? So the 407 Act was passed in 1998, a year before the sale. So just before they sold the company to the private sector company, they did the Highway 407 Act. Now, that act wasn't needed if the province maintained control of the highway, because the province issues your driver's license, and you can lose your driver's license for unpaid speeding tickets, for any number of reasons under the Highway Traffic Act, which has existed for decades in the province of Ontario. So the only reason to write so now we get governments writing legislation specifically for private corporations. Private-public partnership, P3. Okay? So this was a critical component of the privatization agreement, meaning the company that wanted to buy the highway wouldn't do it unless they had the legal right to collect the money on the tolls, as it ensured that the company could enforce payment from drivers without a physical toll booth system. So they don't have a physical toll booth. I want you to think about that too. Like in Costa Rica, there's a toll highway you go through when you're going into San Jose and going out of San Jose. I think it's like 300 colones would be about 75 cents Canadian, about 60 cents US. And that's what you pay at the toll. And there's booths. They got the arm that raises and closes, and you throw the money into it, the coins into a basket, and it's computer read, and it's, yeah, that's the correct amount. Or if you don't have the exact change, you give a small bill. The smallest bill over here is a 1,000 colonie note. They're red, and they call them rojos, are red. And then they give you your change, all right? And it's cumbersome. Like, I think that the electronic system is more efficient, but the electronic system can be hacked because there's no guard and there's no bar coming down to tell you can't go on the highway. So the digital system, for the private company in Ontario to buy it, they required this 407 Act. So this was a critical component of the privatization agreement, as it ensured that the company could enforce payment for drivers without a physical toll booth system. With no barriers to stop drivers from using the highway, license plate denial became the primary method for the company to compel payment. It essentially leverages a government-issued service, a driver's license, to enforce a private debt. P3. So the 407 is an example of detrimental P3s. This is all Gemini. Like, I can't believe how accurate they are with this, how fair and balanced, you know. Whatever you're hearing about AI, like AGI, artificial general intelligence, is when the AI starts thinking for itself. This is just aggregation and algorithmic analysis of information to produce a report. Nothing too fancy, but I find it remarkably accurate. The only thing I've ever queried it on was the Holocaust. And I'll tell you something else about that story. I had the opportunity to meet a nephew of the first commissioned American officer to enter into Dachau. And he said, his uncle told him there was one crematorium and it took 24 hours to do one body. And I asked Gemini AI about that, and again, it lied to me. So the AI does lie. Okay, like it's very interesting to me the things it lies about. Okay, all right. 407 as an example of detrimental P3s. The case of the 407 is often cited as a cautionary tale and a prime example of a P3 that was ultimately detrimental to the public. While the government did not receive a one-time cash injection from the sale, critics argue the long-term costs to the public far outweigh the benefit. So the loss of a public asset. The government sold off a valuable public asset at what many consider to be a massive undervaluation. Pork barreling. And analysts have estimated the highway's value to be many times what the government received for the 99-year lease. Way more than 3.1 billion Canadian in 1998. Lack of public control. The government lost its ability to regulate toll rates and ensure that the highway serves the public interest, leading to ever-increasing costs for commuters. High tolls have also deterred some commercial traffic, pushing it back onto the already congested Highway 401. So if commercial traffic, and here they mean semis, right? 18-wheelers, trucks. If commercial transport companies are avoiding a toll highway, you can be damn well sure the highway is overpriced. Because the entire point of commercial transport is timely delivery. And if you're putting your trucks into multi-hour traffic jams on a massively overcongested highway, and you're not using the relief system of the toll highway, that's a sure sign that you've got a problem with pricing and the private sector company is gouging the public. So what happens is it becomes a highway for the rich. Okay? So, and again, the whole P3 system is a further divide in that, biblical expression in the book of Revelation. For those of you who haven't read it, there's a part of the book of Revelation that says that in this time, those with much will be given more, fulfilling the Jewish and Protestant prosperity doctrine, which is complete fucking horseshit, by the way. Most people who have God consciousness live modestly, many of them even at the poverty level, okay? So, complete nonsense. And, all right, we'll get off of that. So, unfair enforcement mechanism. The granting of a government-level power to a private company, the ability to suspend a person's driver's license, is seen by many as an overreach and an unfair collection method, which disproportionately affects those with lower incomes. Okay, fair enough. They just said what I said. This case exemplifies a potential trend where governments seeking to raise quick revenue or offload financial risk enter into P3s that sacrifice long-term public good for short-term political or fiscal gains. While P3s can be an effective way to deliver infrastructure projects, the 407 experience highlights the critical importance of ensuring contracts are structured to protect the public interest, maintain government oversight, and prevent the private entity from leveraging its position at the expense of the population it serves. So there you go, the private-public partnership, okay? Now you'll see this everywhere now, okay? Let's take a look at the private penal system. Okay, and here we go with the prison example of the P3, okay? One sec, I seem to have... That's strange, the way that just does that on its own, the volume. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the rise of private for-profit prisons is a significant and controversial example of a public-private partnership. And again, we're going over this in such detail because I think this is really the part of what we would call the WEF agenda. So the WEF agenda seems to be one in which the human being is a problem on the planet and needs to be highly regulated and controlled. And one of the initial steps towards this is the P3, the public-private partnership. Okay? So the rise of private for-profit prisons in the United States is a significant and controversial example of a public-private partnership. This system has been criticized for its impact on the fairness of the penal system and the core mission of justice and rehabilitation. So, how private prisons affect the fairness of the penal system. The fundamental criticism of private prisons is the conflict between the profit motive and the public good. Duh! A public penal system is designed to serve a number of goals: retribution, deterrence, incapacitation, and rehabilitation. The core principle of a private company, however, is to maximize profit for its shareholders. This creates a perverse incentive structure. Okay? Incentive for longer sentences and higher incarceration rates. Private prison companies make money for every inmate they house. This has led to accusations that these companies and their lobbying efforts have a financial interest in maintaining high incarceration rates and advocating for stricter sentencing laws, such as mandatory minimums. Some contracts even contain bed guarantees, bed as in bedding, sleeping, which require the government to pay for a certain percentage of occupied beds, regardless of the actual number of inmates. This essentially penalizes the government and taxpayers for a decrease in the crime rate. Very similar to the Highway 407 example, right? Everything goes in favor of the private company. And look, do you know anybody? And the details of who the 407 consortium was in Toronto were never made public. We don't know who the people are and who the companies are that bought that highway. Reduced quality of life and services. To maximize profit, private prisons often cut costs. This can lead to a lower quality of life for inmates. Reports have documented inadequate food, poor living conditions, and a lack of proper medical care. Duh! Why pay? The pursuit of cost-saving measures has also been linked to a reduction in educational, vocational, and rehabilitative programs that are crucial for an inmate's successful reintegration into society. Compromised safety and security. Cost-cutting extends to staffing. Private prisons are known to pay their correctional officers less and provide them with less training than public prisons. That's alarming. This can lead to higher staff turnover and, consequently, a less stable and more dangerous environment. Studies have shown that private prisons have higher rates of inmate-on-inmate and inmate-on-staff assaults compared to public facilities. Disproportionate impact on minorities. The for-profit prison system has been linked to racial disparities in incarceration. Since people of color are disproportionately represented in the U.S. prison population, the for-profit model effectively commodifies their confinement, raising ethical concerns about a system that profits from the incarceration of marginalized communities. Why the government gave up its prison system and turned it over to the private sector. Primary reasons state and federal government turned to the private sector for prisons was to address a massive problem of prison overcrowding that began in the 1980s. A tough-on-crime approach and the war on drugs led to a dramatic increase in the incarcerated population, far outstripping the capacity of public facilities. The argument for privatization centered on the idea that private companies could build and operate prisons more efficiently and at a lower cost than the government. The promise was that private prisons would provide much-needed bed space and reduce the financial burden on taxpayers. Governments saw an opportunity to offload the financial and logistical challenges of building new prisons and managing a burgeoning inmate population. Now, the consequences of this decision. The consequences of this decision have been widely debated and are a source of significant controversy. Increased recidivism. The lack of robust rehabilitation and educational programs in many private prisons is a major concern. Without the tools to successfully re-enter society, a higher rate of released inmates are likely to reoffend and return to prison. creating a cycle of incarceration that benefits the private companies. Moral and ethical dilemmas. The most fundamental consequence is the transformation of incarceration from a public service to a for-profit industry. This raises profound ethical questions about the morality of profiting from human confinement. The very purpose of imprisonment, rehabilitation, and justice can be seen as secondary to the company's bottom line. Lack of transparency and accountability. Private prisons are not always subject to the same level of public scrutiny and reporting as government-run facilities. This can make it difficult to monitor conditions, track data on things like assaults and recidivism, and hold companies accountable for human rights violations or operational failures. Financial discrepancies. While private prisons are often promoted as a cheaper alternative, studies have consistently challenged this claim. Some audits have found that private prisons are not necessarily more cost-effective when accounting for the fact that they often house less expensive, low-security inmates and can charge governments for empty beds. In conclusion, the private penal system in the United States has introduced a powerful profit motive into a system that should be guided by principles of justice, fairness, and rehabilitation. While the government's initial decision was driven by a need to address overcrowding and budget constraints, the consequences have led to a system where financial incentives can conflict with the public interest, raising serious questions about the long-term integrity and fairness of the U.S. penal system. So why do I bring up the P3, the private-public partnership, or public-private partnership? Because in my estimation, it's a reflection of the growing hypocrisy of this adherence to the democratic principle and the free market. Go back to the beginning of the podcast where I explained what Taiwan did to raise revenue. Okay? Why aren't we doing that in the United States? Now, I realize there's laws against profiting from or forcing prisoners in a penal situation to work, but they should be able to do sufficient amount of work in the public space, whether it be road repair or various things, that they equitize their incarceration. But this is considered to be, again, a conflict of interest because the government has a high incentive to incarcerate people to get essentially free labor. But it's not really free if you have to house them, pay the guards, and feed them, and provide medical and dental as well. Don't forget that when you're in jail or in prison, you get free medical and dental. You can get your teeth worked on. You can get all kinds of things that people in the public find it difficult to afford now. So the future we're looking at is one in which, and I don't see anything Trump is doing really changing this at all. In fact, the more I study Trump, the more I see him as a Western version of Xi Jinping. So Xi Jinping's goal has been to unify the Chinese people, to bring them all under one umbrella. So he grabbed Hong Kong, he wants to grab Taiwan, he'll want to bring Singapore into greater alliance with the CCP in Beijing, and basically operate as a cultural force displaced into different nation states, which are now assimilated provinces of the Greater China. Okay? How is Trump any different? The way he bullies NATO, the way he goes after them with trade and tariff wars. Sure, you can argue the merits of those things. You can say that, well, the U.S. has been too kind in leaving its market open for all imports without tariffs, and many export markets have huge tariffs on American products like automobiles. And it makes sense from that perspective. But at the end of the day, he's doing the same thing as Xi Jinping. He's trying to corral the West into one unified force, okay? Which, again, is an interesting concept in and of itself. But today I just wanted to talk about this idea of public and private partnerships and to make you aware of it. And now that you're aware of it, you can tune into it. So whereas it may have passed by you without any significance in the past, in the newspapers or online or on YouTube, you may have seen stories and not really understood what the issue was. Now you understand what the issue is. It's about this growing group of fucking billionaires and trillionaires consuming everything in their path. We're basically turning the world over and creating a monarchy of predators who've climbed to the top of the capital pole by becoming billionaires. And let me tell you, you can't become a billionaire without being a fucking scumbag. There is no benign billionaire out there. Warren Buffett is a fucking scumbag. George Soros is a fucking scumbag. Jeff Bezos is a fucking scumbag. And Amazon is practically a public-private partnership. COVID deliberately doubled their profit margins and hasn't really returned us to normal shopping. Okay? Now, however you think about this is your business. But I assure you that these P3s are the new norm. And if I'm correct, they're going to become more and more and more normal. And so you're going to see things like, even in countries like Canada that offer socialized medicine, and Australia does as well, and a lot of people in America, like Michael Moore did that documentary on the health system in the United States, they hold ours up as an example, but our healthcare system is quite dismal. It can be 2 years to get something looked at. People die waiting for treatment in Canada. I don't know if it's the same in Australia. So how are they going to cure this problem? Well, they're going to find a way to create a P3 that displaces medical services into the private sector and still suggests somehow that it's all publicly accessible. It's all public medicine when it isn't. Anyways, that's the Talamanca review today. And I'm going to call this the P3 dilemma. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.